Boy, I started this one soon. I was here like 3 days ago and I made a video, but I didn't upload it because it did what I thought it was gonna do, which was go from one subject to the other, to the next, and that's just how my mind works. Pardon the Asperger's or whatever it's called. This subject is going to be more on point with the main lesson I learned from that near-death experience, as I've mentioned in my first video. And pardon for the shadow across my face. The light is not in the perfect position. And pardon me, unlike every other YouTuber who has the perfect setup. I don't. It's using my phone and making a video. So, if you watched the first video and you're one of my 87 subscribers, of which I thank you all for, because that was impressive to just watch that number climb. I didn't realize it would have caught on, or people would be so receptive to it, because there seems to be a uprising of a lot of people who have either had experiences or are curious of it. But nonetheless, the topic for today is mainly the biggest lesson I learned throughout both 2020 and in its entirety, plus what ended up happening after the fact of my near-death experience. And this is also going to have a part of a story or stories from the past, as well as the future, meaning after the near-death experience, because it was all correlated, as life tends to be. It's just so damn weird to me. It's about probably the number one reason we're all here. I mean, if you're conscious and you're watching this video, it's the reason you're here, and it's because a man and a woman got together, had sex, and conceived you, and you're here now. And that seems to be the biggest drama in life today, is our striving for that through misguided means. It doesn't mean our desire isn't there, it means our means to it are misaligned with genuine traits. And I'll get more into that later. It's more so based on what you see nowadays, which is pornography, normalized hookup culture, to the point of just hooking up to the point of romanticizing something that wasn't meant to be romanticized. And that was the biggest lesson in 2020. See, I mentioned Asperger's for one in the second video, and I might have mentioned it in the first, which was a social disorder. That's what it was labeled as. And yeah, when you're socially delayed, that's what I like to call it. I really don't know if it was even that. I think it was more so a side effect of being labeled it and then placed into these special classes. Let's just say I was at the end of my rope in my life in 2020, but there was something there for me to grasp onto. And in that regard, I'd gotten a job and I was immersed with people that were within my own age group and in my original hometown, of which I hadn't been in for the last 20 years until 2020. And then I slowly started getting more social, and that desire was still in my mind, but I always felt like I wasn't worthy of it, of which painfully asserting it I wasn't. Because I was just going about the desire blindly, and I wasn't taking the evidence against me, not as self-judgment, but as ultimate fucking truth. Meaning, if I was to end up getting a woman pregnant, would I be able to take care of the child, and would there be a guarantee that we would be together forever? No. And that was kind of the painful lesson in it. I was all about the idea of not promiscuity, but abstinence in that regard, where it's just if you're not willing to deal with the consequences, don't do it. But this world is so predicated to just capturing that desire and misaligning it from truth to something that plays out in your head like a movie. Hence why, like, you come across a girl and the first thing you think about is romanticizing the act itself. That's lust. That is not love. That is not compassion. That is not human. That is romanticizing just an act separate from its ultimate reality, which is ending up pregnant. A lot of people don't have that insight within responsibility, nor do they want to be mindful of it. And it's not their fault, honestly. But understanding why you hurt so much sometimes takes a lot of hurt to realize it. And that was kind of the end narrative to the whole experience I had in 2020, which was pain itself holds the most valuable lessons to life, and oftentimes people are just held back by the past because it haunts them. They don't know how to incorporate it, of which gives me the intention I have, which is to help people understand the pain they have in the past so that they can move on and understand the future, rather than to just have this fear guiding them throughout life. So the first story I want to bring up, it correlated to a lesson I learned after the near-death experience. I observed it. I didn't learn it until after the fact, because then I realized what was going on. Because in not being completely social for however many years, I had a few friends here and there, but they were never like in my age group or whatever. I was never openly social like that. And a lot of people in my hometown have been there since they were born. I went to Florida, to the cities, and then back home. And in that time, I learned a lot about the state of the United States as a whole. So my cousin was a strange connection I had with my hometown, because for one, we didn't know we were cousins until later on. And then I slowly started venturing into that social group, and of course, because I was deeply in misery, it revolved around the bar scene, that kind of stuff. Pardon the boats. That one sounds a little sick. But my cousin was like one of those little attachments I had. There was some sort of relation there, so I had something to go with. And in the beginning of 2020, I started finding my social group. I rode my first motorcycle, then drove my first motorcycle, which was hers. Then, with the COVID the COVID stimulus check that we were all given, I bought my first motorcycle for $1,200, if you can imagine that. So I bought my first motorcycle, started being social, to which I experienced a lot of other things in my life. Like, before I even bought my motorcycle is when I had my first kiss. And to think about that, not having a first kiss for 27 years, let's just say that holds some gravity. So to get with the story with my cousin and what I learned, I thought about this from not an archetypal standpoint, but I'm sure someone can draw that conclusion if they were so adapted to, or if they so desired. There was a friend of mine that was older. He was 50s or so. I liked his charisma. His charisma was like, it had a gravitas to it. He was comforting to be around. He didn't like push you outside of your bounds, but he also wasn't one to just like sit back and let things happen, so to speak. I think it was because he learned his harsh lesson. So his fact was that he was not diagnosed. Fucking A. I'm sure through it he probably could have been, but he was divorced, and it gave him a bitter sense about the word marriage, of which, I mean, who wouldn't? Especially nowadays where marriage has had the government's little fingers inside of it. That's set up for failure from the fucking get-go. So he was divorced. My cousin ended up in a relationship very early on in 2020, I think. Even earlier than that. Maybe just the beginning. Because I remember the first day I met him, and he was really a really cool guy that I met. And so to speak, we're still friends. I haven't seen him in about a year. I really appreciated him. He was a really good guy, and he was really good to her. And it came to a point where that relationship was so comfortable to the both of them. He sorry for my interpretation, started being open about the fact that he wanted to propose to my cousin. And I'm gonna try to give these people names so that it doesn't become so elusive. I'll call the guy that was divorced, I'll call James, and then my cousin's boyfriend, I'll call Casey. No, that doesn't work, but whatever. Casey. Fuck it. So he wanted to get married to my cousin. And with the 50-year-old guy, James, I think that's what I called him, he imposed his ideology about marriage to my cousin, but then portrayed a different ideology to Casey. Meaning, the second, he would tell my cousin constantly, saying, once you hear that word marriage, just run. He would tell that to my cousin, and then go to Casey. I swear to God, I'm going to accidentally say their freaking name. And he would tell them, or tell him that they were good together. And that was his bitter interpretation of marriage, and getting advice from people that really don't have it down to a T. Who the hell's to know? Because I didn't know a damn thing until I had to fall in love and realize really why it was so socially structured. Or not socially structured, because it isn't just a social structure, it's the reason we're all here. But it was his negative outlook about it that infected her mind, and then slowly over time they grew disconnected, and I noticed this, even though I didn't want to say I noticed it. After the near-death experience, I most certainly just incorporated all the lessons of my past, including this one memory. And, how do I go about saying the next? It just set them at odds to each other, and it was funny because I was sitting there hip deep in my own depression / doubt / fear / anxiety about the whole woman thing, because I wanted a woman by my side too, and I didn't have a damn clue what to do or why I felt the way that I did. And they would come to me. My cousin came to me, and Casey came to me, both like on their own. My cousin first, she would just be like, what's going on? I don't understand it. And then Casey would catch me off guard when we were just hanging out one day. Dude, I love her and I just don't know what's going on. And I had no idea what to tell them, because I hadn't a clue how it worked at all. I was brain dead at that point, just observing, really. And then it just broke off because it got so quiet and so disconnected, where they were not emotionally connected and they weren't communicating to each other, to which it just split up, which creates this social drama we see nowadays. And after the near-death experience, I learned it was communication, or the lack thereof, that really tore apart relationships. Because honestly, they were really good together, and if you didn't have those outside factors getting in between the two people, which actually comes into correlation with my own story, which is really freaking weird, it would have never split up. And I swear to God, I know they're both still haunted by this. Because I know for certain if my cousin ever knew I made this video, I don't know if I'd ever talk to her again, because she is so haunted by that past. And honestly, I've never seen her happier or more upset. And honestly, that's what love does to you. You're the happiest you've ever been, and also the most depressed and pissed off you've ever been. I mean, that's kind of the point of it, right? And a lot of it is erasing the old ways of, not old ways, but new ways that we've gone about finding relationships and objectification. And when it's based on lies, that just ends up tearing it apart. After the near-death experience, when I met the girl that I did, I told her on the first night I met her, I said the honest-to-God reason most relationships break up is because they don't communicate. And that ended up becoming true, hence why I had to be a prophecy about that, or prophesize about it. Is I knew that the inability to communicate was the problem, but I didn't really know it was going to come into effect in my life at all. And then after the near-death experience, I've said that about 50 times now. That's when it was revealed to me, like how people would come in between. Like I learned that like firsthand. For one, I learned about the pain, and what gave me value to my being was understanding Asperger's the way that I do, because I instantly, in that moment, I found a sense of pride that I have never felt in 27 years of my life, because I understand the diagnosis to the point where it's on the back of my hand. And that gave me a sense of pride, and to jinx myself, I literally asked out loud, what is next, in pure, utter happiness. And at this point, I still had friends, so to speak. Because I really don't like that word. Friends is kind of a loose term that I like to use. They're people looking for you for things, or I don't know. If you remain in their comfort zone, you're never going to get anything until you breach it, and then you're thrown out like an escaping electron. But that was the night I met her. And then that's when that memory of my cousin's relationship came to mind, and I was like, wait a second, it was communication that they were lacking. They didn't talk to each other. When they were together at the end part, they would never talk to each other. It was so closed off, and I'm just like, for one, you guys are good together. What the hell is this doing? And then later on, I'd see it still haunting her, because we would go on motorcycle rides throughout the summer. And then it got to the point where she didn't even want to touch her motorcycle, which is kind of psychologically related to the haunting of the past, which is like, no, that has attachment to him and it brings up memories that I haven't learned. I don't want to do it. And seeing that kind of like hurt, it just was like, don't let that ruin what you used to enjoy. Either that or just question why you enjoyed it in the first place. Because a lot of what my generation is doing is just like grasping onto that fountain of youth like it's everlasting, and nothing is ever, like, what their actions do never add up, or not add up, but there's no circumstances to however they go about life, and there is. And the modern ideology is, without the idea of consequences to actions, people end up building the prisons that they live within before they even know it. Which gets me onto my second subject, which is how the government got its little fingers into the whole relationship aspect of life, because there's multitude of purposes to families. And this I learned from my own family, which was my mother raised me as a single mother. And as you could imagine, psychologically speaking as well, is it raised me in a kind of emasculated sense, where I was closed off to the world, but the masculine part of me was also interested in things more than people. But I didn't have the strength of mind to speak my truth, or to know my own way. I was still learning through the social atmosphere, because then at that point life just became a movie that I played out. And it's honestly the family structure is the one structure that holds a society or a civilization together. The second that decays, you've got the chaos that we see today, which is why I see such things as like my cousin going to like reckless habits. Same with me. It's not like I didn't do anything reckless. God forbid. I did. Hence the motorcycle accident. I mean, isn't that proof in the pudding, really? But there's that sexual drama between male and female that seems so elusive to people, and a lot of people want to avoid it. And it was strange, because before I even met her, I had an experience earlier on in 2018, and this was at a very dark moment in my life, and God forbid I mention suicidal ideation. The one thing that pulled me from that idea was witnessing the birth of my now 3-year-old sister, and it saved me many times over. More so, it just told me, hang on for dear life, because life's about to get interesting, of which I was just like, oh, now I see why it was interesting. It was more so a joke. You really don't have to dig far. Like, a lot of the lessons I think people have had in their life, like a lot of the haunting in their past, is something that's already happened, and something that can be learned from, which changes their future. And the second you incorporate that into a lesson, you're better for it. But the worst part about it, it's not worst, it's just perceived as such, is because it destroys certain things you thought you needed. Like other people, for instance. Because after my near-death experience, see, before that, I had no... I'm not going to say I didn't have no value to my life, because I still valued things, but I just felt like there was nothing there for me to fight for, because I couldn't find my way through this life. I couldn't make a living, I couldn't do this, I couldn't enjoy simply what I loved, which is aviation, given my other channel with like 2,000 freaking videos from my past. But I was losing myself in kind of the social moment, per se. And then losing everybody that I ever thought of as a friend after meeting that one woman really taught me a lot about really the harsh nature and the beautiful and blissful nature of self-love, meaning not minding being alone, not minding knowing yourself apart from other people, because now whenever I run into anybody from my past, it's like I'm going back in time because they're still predicated on what happened between me and the woman I met. I didn't really go into detail with that story, and before this video is done, I'll get into a little bit of it. I suppose the craziest thing I ever did in that moment was, for one, I met her, and I didn't fall in love until I looked at her eyes that one moment. And in that moment, after the near-death experience, hours after finding this sense of pride, like, oh, I have a purpose now, I can explain Asperger's. Little did I know I had a little bit more to explain. I met her and then fell instantly, and I even brought her home, and it was just such a weird scenario because I'd never experienced it before in my life. It was just like natural. I felt natural in that first day. Everything after that, I could sense it getting further and further apart. Which also brings me to something that I forgot to mention, which was when I learned how people talk about each other, i.e. gossip. When I was happy about having met her, within the first week, I would go to people and be like, oh, I just met her, and I only did this to like 2 or 3 people, just to like sift through the rubble and see what's going on, because I was curious as all hell. One person actually was kind about her and said she's down to earth, she likes nature, she likes going out for walks. I'm like, cool, okay. Other people were not so genuine. They would give me simple blanket statements of like, she's fucking crazy, or the other. And it's kind of funny because I knew instantly in my head when I was told that she was crazy, I was like, oh, and I'm not, for having fallen for her. I didn't tell them I was falling for her, I just said I met her. And then, of course, months later, I was called crazy, in which case I was ostracized from everybody. I've gotten maybe 1 text in the last year from anybody in my hometown, if you can believe that. It's utterly ridiculous. It's just like, this is what's caused the disconnection between people. And it's this digital atmosphere that people have where they can confront their fears through this illusory device known as a phone, rather than face them up front. Because I felt in my head, I'm like, if she has a question about me, she can come and ask. Little did I know the danger of her going to other people asking about information for me. And the reason I lost all fear was because I knew none of them had anything on me. None of them barely even knew me. Any of them barely even knew me. No, well, some of them, no. Whatever. But there was nothing in my past for them to demonize, so they basically just constructed lies to get her in fear of me, because I changed perceptibly to them, in such a way where they felt berating me was the best way to go forward. Under the guise of fear, because she's never felt that way, neither have I. I was not afraid. It was more so just like, holy shit, is life getting interesting, especially after a motorcycle accident, of which I realized happened for a reason. So it was basically just a feedback loop of, haha, here you are, have fun. It was almost like I was dead the 27 years before, and now I'm alive, even though I've been killed by everybody in their mind. about who I was. I am simply just an idea in their mind, and when I come in front of them, they get the facial features, to which they get the memory, to which they get their assumptions about me without ever having asked me. It's mostly just the gossip, because I had constant people telling me before the end of 2020 that I was nothing but a talking piece of the hometown, of which I realized there's no such thing as bad publicity. So to end this, nothing else to say. I really want to make this longer because the relationship between men and women in this time is just so toxic, but so beautiful when you're not seeing it through the lens that the world wants you to see it in. When you erase that lens, there is beauty in the most rarest, weirdest circumstances in life. But then it's what happens on the outside of them that destroys it. And in which case, it's almost like the pride becomes the fall. But you can't know until you really learn, of which, I mean, if you've fallen in love and fallen out and it leaves a bitter taste in the mouth, learn something from it and don't rush anything. Hence where I'm at now. Don't rush anything and don't push it. Don't go blindly into the night, but just rage against the dying of the light, so to speak. Whatever. So before I end up just going off on tangents. I haven't spoken to anybody, so my language is kind of flawed. I hope everyone has a good day, and I hope you took something from this. I'll try to think of another video to upload. I had an idea in my mind, and I forgot what it was, but I'll probably think of it again. So I hope you took something from this. It's probably going to be more... I'll do other videos about this, because there's a lot about the family structure that I haven't mentioned, but I want to. But I don't want to make this a 50-minute video, so... I hope you have a good day, and I hope you've taken something from this. So have a good day, everybody.